There are thousands of things you could watch tonight. New releases, trending series, films everyone is talking about. The algorithm has been building a recommendation list just for you, learning your patterns, curating your options, practically begging you to try something different. And yet, you scroll past all of it. You find the one you've seen before, maybe a dozen times before, and you press play. The theme music starts. The familiar faces appear. And something in you settles, just slightly, in a way that nothing new could have offered. Most people assume this is laziness, or nostalgia runs amok, or a sign that you've somehow given up on discovery. But psychology tells a different story entirely, because the pull toward the familiar isn't a passive thing. It isn't the absence of a decision. It is a decision made by a mind that knows, quite precisely, what it needs. Think about what it actually feels like to watch something for the first time. Your brain is working, tracking new characters, absorbing backstory, learning the rules of a world you've never entered. There's pleasure in that, real pleasure, but it's a particular kind of pleasure, the kind that requires something from you. Attention, cognitive effort, presence. Now think about what it feels like to return to something you already know. The opening notes of a score you've heard 100 times. A character whose voice is as familiar as a friend's. A scene you could narrate from memory. What your brain does in that moment is different measurably, neurologically different. The effort lifts, the bracing settles. Something that had been slightly tense in your releases. This isn't a small thing. This is your nervous system recognizing safety. For some people, rewatching is primarily about what psychologists call predictability bias, the brain's deep, structural preference for environments it can control, especially when the rest of life cannot be controlled at all. When the world feels unstable, when work is uncertain, when relationships are complicated, when the future resists being predicted, the brain doesn't stop craving order. It searches for it wherever it can be found. And a show you already know is, in a precise psychological sense, a perfectly orderly environment. You know who survives. You know what the joke is before it lands. You know how the story ends, and that it does end, cleanly, in a way real life rarely does. That knowledge isn't boring, it's regulating. Pressing play on a familiar show is like coming home after a long day. Everything is exactly where it should be. This is why rewatching spikes during periods of difficulty. It isn't escapism in the avoidance sense. It is the mind reaching for something stable to hold on to while the unstable parts of life are processed in the background. The show becomes an anchor, not because it distracts from reality, but because it steadies the nervous system enough to face reality more fully. For others, the pull toward familiar content operates through a different mechanism, one rooted not in emotional regulation, but in sheer cognitive exhaustion. Modern life demands constant mental output, problems to solve, decisions to make, people to read and respond to. By the end of the day, the brain that has been performing all of this has very little left. And watching something new requires more from it. New characters, new plots, new emotional tones, all of it effortful, in a way a depleted brain simply cannot afford. Psychologists call this cognitive load reduction, the mind's strategy of choosing tasks that demand less in order to recover capacity for what matters most. Rewatching familiar content is, in this sense, background comfort, mental white noise, a way to be present in the room without being asked to think. The familiar show doesn't demand anything. And for a mind that has given everything it had to the day, that quality asking nothing, demanding nothing, is the most restorative thing on offer. If any part of this feels familiar to you, take a moment to drop a like on the video. It helps more people find conversations like this. And, if you enjoy exploring the deeper psychology of human behavior, consider subscribing. It really does help keep this work going. But there is a third kind of rewatcher, and their experience is perhaps the most quietly poignant of all. For this person, it isn't the show they're returning to. It's the memory attached to it. Maybe they first watched it during a particular chapter of their life, with a person they've lost, or in a home they no longer live in, or at a time when they were someone slightly different than who they are now. The show has not changed. They have. And pressing play is a way, however briefly, of closing that distance. Psychologists call this emotional time travel. The brain, encountering a sensory experience, a theme, a voice, a scene that was encoded during an emotionally significant moment, doesn't just remember the moment. It partially re-enters it. The feelings associated with the original experience become available again, not fully, but enough to be felt, enough to matter. This is why people cry during scenes they've watched 10 times before. It's not the scene. It's the memory the scene is carrying, the feeling of who they were when they first watched it, and the gentle grief of how much has changed since. The show hasn't moved. It is frozen in time, waiting, a portal not to the story, but to the person they used to be. And letting go of it feels, at some level, like letting go of that version of themselves. So, they keep coming back not because they've forgotten what happens, but because they don't want to forget what it felt like. And then there is the fourth kind of rewatcher, the one most misunderstood by everyone else, including themselves. These people return to the same material, not for comfort, not for rest, and not for memory. They return because they're convinced they missed something. And they're usually right. Psychologists link this to high openness and analytical thinking, a cognitive orientation that finds genuine pleasure in complexity, patterns, and details invisible on first pass. For these people, a show watched once isn't fully known. The first viewing is always incomplete. You can't see which details are significant until you know what they're pointing toward. Only when you know the ending can you finally see the beginning clearly. So they watch again, not in repetition, but in exploration. A show isn't just a story. It is a world, with corners they haven't examined and logic they want to fully map. Every new detail they catch is its own small satisfaction, proof the world they chose still has more to offer. To them, rewatching isn't watching less. It's watching more deeply. What all four of these people share is something the culture of perpetual novelty tends to dismiss without examining. They are not avoiding growth. They are not stuck in the past. They are making a specific, psychologically grounded choice about what their mind needs, with a clarity that constant novelty seeking never requires. The comfort seeker is protecting their peace. The cognitively depleted are conserving their energy. The nostalgic are tending to their history. The analysts are deepening their understanding. We live inside a cultural story that equates newness with progress and familiarity with stagnation, and the algorithm reflects it back constantly. More, different, next. But psychology quietly suggests something else. Knowing what actually restores you, what actually steadies you, what actually nourishes your particular mind, that is not a limitation. It is a form of self-knowledge that many people spend years trying to develop. There is a question worth sitting with. Not which type of rewatcher you are, though that is worth knowing, but what your choices reveal about what you actually need. The shows and films people return to are not random. They map something real about the inner landscape of the person returning to them. What brings safety, what carries meaning, what the mind is still trying to understand. In a world that tells you to keep consuming, keep exploring, keep moving toward the next thing, the person who pauses, turns back toward something familiar, and chooses depth over novelty has understood something quietly important. Sometimes, the best thing isn't new, it's known. And knowing what is good for you truly, specifically, without apology, is one of the most honest acts of self-awareness there is. Before you go, I want to ask you, what's the one show or movie you find yourself returning to over and over again? Why do you think it keeps calling you back? Share it in the comments. I'd love to explore the stories that shape our comfort, nostalgia, and connection. If you enjoyed this dive into the psychology of why we rewatch, hit subscribe, and let's keep uncovering the patterns of human behavior together. Thanks for watching.